There are a large number of effects that we can use to modify our layers, but luckily we can adjust and animate them in pretty much the same manner. If we go up to our effects menu, we can select from a category and we can apply an effect by selecting it from one of the categories. You'll see that it appears here in my timeline window, and then I also get a palette called the Effect Control Palette. We can also add an effect by going to the Effect and Presets palette. And here you'll notice that we have our selection of categories similar to the ones that appear in the Effect menu. From here I can actually select an effect and I can drag it into the timeline window or into the actual layer of the composition window. Here I can see the Effect Control Palette, and I can bring this up by using the F3 key or by going to my Effect menu. I can turn off an effect by selecting the F that's located here next to the actual effect in the Effect Control Palette or here in the timeline window. If I want to delete an effect, I can select that effect and press the delete key. This Effects Control Palette, if you'll notice, is the exact same area as the effect here in the effects option under the layer. And so this is shows the effects that are listed on the actual layer, so that we can use this in order to better manage our effects for a layer. There's many types of controls that we'll be using in our Effect Control Palette. I'll be going over each one individually so that they're easier to understand. You can see here that we have a few properties with a twirl down arrow and a numerical entry. This is the slider bar. If I were to twirl down the arrow here, you can see the actual slider bar. By dragging the marker, you can see how the effect for that property works for the layer. You'll notice that we have a minimum and a maximum for this actual slider bar. And if I use the actual numeric, I can use it as a slider bar also. Or I can simply enter my amount and it'll appear here, and the marker will move to that position on the slider bar. The one thing to note though is that I can go above the number in the slider bar using the numerical entry. And the reason for this is that these are not the absolute values that After Effects will let us use. It's just the values that After Effects sets because it's the most common amounts that people would use for the program. If we go to this, if we right click on the property that we want to change the slider bar for, we can go to Edit Value, and you'll see that here we get our actual slider range. We have our minimum value here, and this is the actual minimum value, which here is 0. And then we have our maximum value, which we have here set for the bar, and the actual maximum value, which here is 30,000. We also have the value that we're setting the marker to. So if I were to change this to say 100 and this to 50, you would see here that the bar has changed to the new set setting within the actual slider range, and the value's been set for the marker. I can still adjust it here, and the reason I might want to change the range for the slider bar is if I have numbers that are really close together, such as 0 to say 5, I'll have more control along the slider bar, whereas if I have this as the 0 to say 1000, I'll have less control over the numbers that I can get using the slider bar. The next type of control that we'll be talking about is called the dial. The dial will be used to change the properties such as angles and degrees of a property. And you can see here that we have numerical entries with a degree marking, and there's another number here, and this is for the revolutions. When the arrow is twirled up, you'll notice that it appears to be similar to the slider bar, but you can tell the difference because it has these two entries. And here we have the actual dial. You'll notice this black line here, and this represents the angle of the degree for the actual dial. And if I change the dial here, you can see that the number changes here, and the effect takes place in the composition window. If I go beyond its original point, you'll see that the degree resets and the revolution number goes up. So we can actually use this as if it were a real dial. And we can also go in the opposite direction to gain a negative number in order to, as you can see here, this rotates the layer, and this would allow us to go in the opposite direction. This dial will be used to change things such as that angle of the actual layer, but we can also use it for things like the color range. And you'll see here that the color here is adjusted by the dial, and the more I go around, the different the color gets because of how it uses the dial. The next type of control that we'll be talking about is called the color swatch. The color swatch can be seen by this control here. Here it's only two buttons. One is the actual color swatch, and the other is an eyedropper. If I click the color swatch, it brings up the color picker, and this allows me to pick a color using the two controls here. Here I can change the hue, and we can also enter the hue, saturation, and brightness in this area. And you'll see that this is my degree of the hue, and the saturation is the left and right movement on this palette here, and the up and down movement is the brightness, and we can set those with numerical entries here. We can also set our RGB levels here if we know what those levels are, or if we have an entry that we need to place into this, we can get it from this area here. If we just select the color, then we can see it here. We can also use web colors by entering a number for the web color that we want to select. And by clicking OK, you can see that the swatch now changes to that color from the color picker. And you can see here in the actual composition that color is being used for that property. If I were to use the actual eyedropper tool here, you can see that the color of the swatch changes to whatever color I am selecting on the screen, regardless of what it belongs to. And I can use this if I have a color on the screen, or say a palette of colors off to the side, and I can just use that to select colors. And you can see that the color, by clicking, that color is automatically placed into the color swatch.